The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
Welcome to On the Mat. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, joined by a man whose weapon of choice is a camera, Andy Hamilton of TrackWrestling.com. How are you, Andy?
Doing well. A camera, huh?
I saw you roaming around with the camera on at the World Team Trials in Rochester. I just thought, what a great weapon to have rather than any other weapon that you might use. Photography. Great weapon. Like your weapon of choice, Andy. Outstanding.
I don't know that I'd want to use a camera for self-defense.
No, but, it's like, hey, you use a pen as a weapon. You can write, and you're very articulate. I just think that's a good choice.
Here a little
yeah,
bit.
I think it's good. SNL back in the day, they had a skit called Johnny Letter, and I thought it was pretty funny. And you're artistic in your journalistic ventures, and so you are known for your journalism and writing, but now you're getting into photography. So do you feel like you captured the essence of the World Team Trials in your photos?
I don't know if I'm quite at that level yet, but it's fun. It's fun.
It looks fun.
Goof around with camera a little bit. It's given me a whole different level of appreciation for guys like Tony Rotundo, John Sachs, Mark Lundy, Justin Hawk, those guys that have been doing it for a long time, been doing a phenomenal job. When you delve into somebody else's domain a little bit, you just get a deeper appreciation for what they do. And those guys do such a phenomenal job. And there are others out there too that I don't want to forget. But,
Wyatt Schultz, let's throw him out there. Wyatt Schultz. Now, did you get a chance to see Justin Hawk's display?
I did.
It's the first time I've really had a chance to see it. It was outstanding. What great work.
Yeah, and he took my photos.
He did?
There. Yeah,
Nice.
Had me scrunch my eyebrows together, and
I like it.
The whole 9 yards with it. And so I was practicing that the rest of the weekend, trying to get that pose that he wanted me to do down. So,
well, you are UWW president and vice president and all those things that are on the badges that we have here on the outside.
Staff.
Yeah, all that stuff. Now, I know
Athlete.
your major was not science. I know that. It was communication, journalism, and that's where your expertise lies. But will you help me try to figure this out? In the corner between periods, I see the towel fanning. And I got to understand, and maybe you can give me some insight, what that actually does. Because my thought is, you're spending all this time warming up. Why would you want to try to cool them down? And does that oxygen you get from that actually help? Do you have any thoughts on this, on why that would be? Because you don't see it at college. It's only at international competitions where you see them toweling them down. I think it's counterproductive. Any thoughts on that?
Well, they got to be toweled down, right? So
well,
what you're getting at is the towel,
the
waving.
Yeah, the toweling down. I get. You want them to be clean from sweat.
I'm the wrong guy to ask. We need to ask our guests about this.
Yeah,
but there is a science to it, though. You're right.
I know.
Watch at the highest levels, like the best towel wavers in the world.
And they're going to town.
They are.
They're really into it. And so between those periods, I would just like to know why it happens and why it's really only at this level of competition.
Let's keep an eye out for it over the course of the next year, Kyle. Who waves the towel the best, what their pace is, what their secrets are. And when we get them on the mat, we're gonna dive into this.
Let's do it. I'm all for it. Now, a guy that we need to watch out for is Pat Popolizo. He's our guest today. What a great performance his RTC had at the World Team Trials in Rochester. Just up and down the lineup, just some amazing performances. A guy that wasn't there, Nick Gwiazdowski, is already in Final X. He'll be at the super heavyweight division, but down the line, some impressive performances.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've really got it rolling right now. I mean, look at fourth place finish at the Ncaa championships, and the telltale sign of a strong program is when you can lose top-notch individuals and then not lose a beat. And they replace Nick Wisdowski and they go on, and here's another wave of talent coming. The likes of Mike Machiavello, Pete Renda, Kevin Jack, a tremendous career. They're going to lose those guys, and yet they're not losing any steam. You got Justin Oliver transferring in. Tariq Wilson had such a phenomenal NCAA tournament. Sean Foss is back. Hayden Hidley, Nick Reenan making the finals of Final X.
Yeah.
Another wave of talent on the way as far as recruiting goes. And, boy, they're here to stay.
Your theme of the World Team Trials, you had a lot written about this, and I like this. It's the youth movement right now. Incredible youth movement, and we brought this up on a previous edition of On the Mat. When I was starting to follow wrestling in those early years, it was next to impossible that a college guy would do anything at the international level. You might get few guys just dinking around, but when Stephen Abbas and Cale Sanderson made that world team in 2001, it was next to unheard of. You're like, oh my gosh, they did that in college? Now you have Dayton Fix, who hasn't even wrestled an official Oklahoma State match, and he's one series away from making a world team. Gable Stevenson's 17 years old. We could go up and down the lineup, but we've talked about this so much, the level of these guys, how good they are going into college. This is unprecedented. We're in new territory. It goes back to Jimmy Carr making an Olympic team in 1972 at the age of 17, but that was an aberration. This is now the norm. You did a breakdown of what the average age was compared to 2008, and it's what, 8 years, was it? 6 to 8 years, somewhere in there?
Like
4 years?
3.5 to 4,
okay.
Somewhere in there. Right now, average age of the contestants in Final X is 24.3.
Okay.
Jordan Burroughs is the oldest at 29. Everybody else is 27 and under. A couple 20-year-olds, Dayton Fix, Zahid Valencia, Nick Reenan's 21, Joey McKenna's 22, Kyle Snyder's 22, Isaiah Martinez, Jaden Cox, Adam Kuhn are 23, Thomas Gilman, Nashawn Garrett are 24. Back in the day, I mean, you look at, compare it to 2008 in the Olympic trials and the ages of some of the guys that were competing then. Bill Zadek was 35 in the finals of the Olympic trials in 2008 against 30-year-old Doug Schwab. Matt Azevedo, 30 years old. Stephen Abbas was 30 years old. Casey Cunningham was 32. Joe Williams was 33. These are guys that were competing at the highest level in the United States at that point. And now guys are getting in it sooner. I'm talking to Doug Schwab about this a little bit. He talked about how he remembered how Gable kind of outlined the path for him. You compete for the Hawkeyes, and when your career ends, you'll start getting into some freestyle stuff. And so he didn't even really wrestle any senior level stuff until his college career was over. And I seem to remember even some guys with the Hawkeyes would finish their career, and then they'd take that summer off, and then they'd dive into it the next year. And now you've got guys, like you mentioned, Fix hasn't even wrestled an official college match yet, and he's in the finals of Final X. Reenan redshirted this year. He'll be a sophomore next year. He's in the finals of Final X. So it's just been really fascinating to watch this trend go the other way. And I think there are a lot of reasons for it. Zeke Jones did some extensive study of the Russian system because we were an outlier as the United States. We were behind everybody else. In the United States, our peak ages for winning world and Olympic medals seem to be about 27 to 31, 32, somewhere in there. We talked about Bill Zadek winning his first world title at 33 years old. But everybody else around the world, there were guys in their late teens, early 20s that were winning at the highest levels. I think of some of the Russians, like Batirov. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he had won 2 Olympic titles by the time he turned 25.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
I think so. I'm almost positive on that.
But to your point, Tom Brands and Terry Brands graduated college in 1992. I believe at least one of them took that year off, and then it was into the full swing. They had their Olympic cycle. So Tom and Terry both won in 1993. Terry won again a world championship in 95, and then Tom the Olympics in 96. So that really was the path that was set. And like you said, now they're expecting to do that even as early as high school. It's pretty remarkable.
Well, I think some of these guys just they've won at such a high level for so long that they just expect to do it. And it doesn't matter if they're rolling against the high school kids, if they're high school kids competing against college kids, or even in the case of Gable Steveson. I watched him out at the training center last year at a world team training camp, and he gave Nick Wisdowski all he could handle. He, I think, wrestled like a 10-6 match with Kyle Snyder in a practice match and looked visibly upset that he didn't win those matches. It wasn't, a moral victory for him, coming close against guys that are as good as it gets on the world level. It was disappointment that he didn't win. And I think it just comes from that, that self-belief that these guys have. And it's not just Gable. I watched, David Carr out there going toe-to-toe with James Green and Jason Nolf and scoring points and getting to his offense. And so I think the guys now are just wired a little bit differently. And you think about 10 years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago, where we were as a country, and Schwab has said this too, that he didn't feel like he had more than a handful of workouts in a college room up until he stepped on campus at Iowa. And he's got a couple older brothers that were D1 wrestlers, and so that gave him a little bit of an advantage growing up. But now there are guys that are stepping in there that have competed 50, 100 or more practices in D1 rooms thanks to the regional training center model, and it has it's just accelerated everything.
As we continue to look at how we blend college, high school with international, Zeke Jones, when we had him on our program during the Ncaa championships, had mentioned that he would like to see us go to a step out. I think you had asked that question, is it time for a step out? The more we watch this, the more we see the pacing and just trying to get something that's completely neutral that we can understand. A step out seems pretty logical to make that literal step toward college wrestling to kind of try to meld the two styles together. I think that's the logical next step, maybe.
Well, I think it's easier to understand, isn't it?
It is.
Rather than trying to figure out why in one instance an official calls it action, and the same scenario might play out a match later and it's stalling for the guy backing out of bounds, or it's stalling against the guy pushing him out of bounds. I think, to me, the more rules we can put in place where it's just cut and dry and it's not so subjective, the better off we are as a sport. And certainly trying to get the two styles melded together a little bit more will be better from the standpoint of viewer friendliness. So I'm all in favor of it. I don't know how everybody else feels, but I hope that we're heading in that direction sooner rather than later.
I think it could work too. Like you say, we would just want to take the subjectivity out of it, because there is subjectivity when it comes to stalling. This is stark. This says you step out, you're going to get a point against you. And the nice thing too is it's not a takedown. It's not worth 2 points. It's just 1 point. You get penalized for that. So I think it has potential to work. But as we continue that youth movement, I think that these kids coming up, that crop of kids, they're going to understand that because they've been so versed in this international system that it's just going to come a little bit more naturally to them because they've been around it their whole lives.
Remember, like when the step out rule came into play too, and people were like, it's just going to turn it into sumo, and that hasn't been the case.
It really hasn't.
Like, there's good wrestling on the edge. It's it's interesting to watch guys circling back in and the games that are played there. We see so much good wrestling on the edge. We see so much good wrestling in the middle of the mat too, because of the fact that guys are trying harder to stay in the center of the mat.
Surprises from the World Team Trials as we look at what transpired. What were maybe two of or three storylines that stood out to you that you said, I didn't really see that happening?
Well, Alex Deringer was on such a roll coming in. Wins a tournament over in Ukraine, beats Hazanov, a couple-time world and Olympic medalist, takes Dake right down to the wire in a call that was probably a coin flip. So we've seen what Kyle Dake has done all spring and winter long. So Alex Deringer comes in on such a roll, and then to see Zahid Valencia totally shut him down, 7-0, 5-1, was really eye-opening to me. But maybe it shouldn't have been. I look back to the World Championships, Junior World Championships last year, and Zahid was right there with Nafanov from Russia in the 86 kilo world final. And, a coin flip type of match, and Nafanov goes on and at 86 kilos wins the Euros this year, the senior level. And Zahid's certainly not an 86 kilo guy. He's more of a 79 kilo guy right now. I think it's a really good fit for him. So now he's at his natural weight, and I think he's certainly a contender for a world medal at the senior level this year if he can get past Kyle Dake. I think no matter who comes out of Final X in State College at 79 kilos is going to be a force to be reckoned with. But that was pretty eye-opening just to see how much he controlled things there. And then Renan, to come through at 86 kilos and beat some guys that had beaten him before and finished ahead of him out in Vegas. And we'll get a chance to talk to Pat Popolizo about Nick Renan and his progress. Be interesting to hear what he has to say about that. So that was surprising. Otherwise, nothing too alarming, in my opinion, but it was certainly fun to see what Gable Steveson did on Saturday.
And the crowd loved it. Right in his home state, right in Minnesota, just about an hour from Apple Valley where he's from. So that was fun to see, just see people get behind him. And then Hayden Zilmer was a fan favorite. They were really into that match when he made a comeback in the second match of the best of three. That was a lot of fun to see that too. But back to what you were talking about with Dake and Valencia, I think that's the matchup I'm looking forward to the most now at the Final X. I think that's the one that's the most compelling, and I probably wouldn't have thought that going in, but that's going to be a great matchup, and believe me, Valencia can win that just based on how he looked and just what you said there, where he's so close up at a weight class in Junior Worlds. I think he might be able to do it.
It's certainly going to be one of the most fascinating to watch, right? You look at some of the pairings that we have now, 57 kilos, Gilman and Fix. It's going to be a lot of fun. 61, Cologne and Garrett. Garrett on such a roll up in Minnesota this past weekend. 21-0 in the final series against Nico Megaludis, a guy that's really hard to score points against. And Ncaa looked razor sharp. I think 79 is going to be a lot of fun. I think heavyweight. Adam Kuhn and Gwiazdowski is super compelling to me. Just seeing a guy in Gwiazdowski with his size and his athleticism and skill level versus the mountain that is Adam Kuhn.
Yeah. Well, the one thing about Kyle Dake, though, is that with his style the way it is, you think, hey, it was 5'5" with Deringer, that's going to translate. Kyle Dake is so deceptive, and he has so many skills, and he's so good that you can't expect that just because there was a tight match there, it's going to translate to Dake. Dake has so many tricks in his arsenal that you better be ready. So it's a coin flip, though, in a way. I think it's that tight, but boy, that's the one to see. It's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah,
absolutely. And as you mentioned, there's so many ways that Kyle Dake can score. He can go get points with his own offense. He can capitalize off your shots. He gets on top. He's a monster with his gut wrench. There's just so many ways that he can put points on the board. So he will force Zahid to be at his absolute best in that best of three series.
The one thing that I hope people understand, and I know you understand this, but just because you did something exceptional in freestyle does not mean it will translate into college wrestling. And I think that's especially true from the top position, because I've heard a lot of people talk about the potential of a Dayton Fix versus Spencer Lee matchup in the collegiate ranks. I just don't see it being anywhere near what he can do in freestyle, being Dayton Fix. What Dayton Fix has to face getting out from underneath Spencer Lee will be monumental. He has no idea what's coming if he goes underneath Spencer Lee. I think he better be ready not to get underneath if he's going to win that match, if that happens, because I've made that mistake early on where I think, oh, they had a great freestyle season. They're just going to tear it up at the college scene, and they'll do well, but it's just a different dynamic, just a leg lace does not translate into near fall points necessarily at the collegiate level. Completely different animals in a lot of ways.
Yeah. There are going to be some battles with those guys for years to come that are going to be really fascinating.
I hope so.
I cannot wait to watch those. I was really hoping we'd get to see one this past weekend, but certainly didn't materialize with Spencer not being there. But I don't know which weight Dayton's going in college, whether it be 25 or 33. But we are going to be in store for a treat there.
Oh, it's going to be awesome.
For about the next decade with those two guys clashing at 57 kilos.
Do you think we'll see Spencer at 125 in college his entire 4 years? You think so?
Yep.
He'd never bump up to 133?
I don't want to never say never, but
DeSanto being there now certainly changes things.
I don't think that there's I don't see it in the cards for him, but I've been wrong before.
It'll be a lot of fun. So if you look at that matchup, though, but you look at Dayton Fix when he did wrestle some of the opens, I think he had some tight matches, at Vegas. I think he won it, but there was a couple 2-1 matches. So there is a learning curve when you get to the collegiate scene and you're putting in 30, 40, 50 matches in a season. It's a little bit different grind than what you would internationally, where it is a little bit more free and you get to be open in how you execute your offense.
It's not a totally different game, but it's a little bit different. I mean, look at, I've made this illustration before. Gilman and Tomasello. Look at their college folk style matches. They come down to like one score, right? I mean, it comes down to Gilman getting that takedown in overtime and in New York City and putting Tomasello on his back and putting him away. Big Ten finals, Tomasello sneaks in a takedown, and that was the difference in the match. One position. And those guys weren't really giving themselves a ton of opportunities to cash in college folk style matches. Whereas when they've wrestled freestyle matches, they've been firefights back and forth, multiple takedowns for both guys. And what's changed? Only the rules, right? I mean, you got the step out rule and freestyle. You can come back from an early mistake, but it just feels in some of those matches almost like in college, if you get down by 3 points, it's almost a death sentence when guys are that hard to score on, when they're that stingy. But it will be interesting to watch. As you mentioned, it's a different rule set. It's a different game, and what translates to college level success doesn't always translate to freestyle success either.
Yeah. Well, and Gilman got beat by Darian Cruz, and I think a few weeks later he tech-falled him at the World Team Trials. So it just it's funny how those things transpire, how they materialize, and I just think it's going to be fun. I hope the wrestling world does get Spencer Lee versus Dayton Fix at least 10 times. We need that. That'd be great for the sport.
It would be. Yeah, it'd be awesome. And I think we will. Just because they're both 57 kilo guys. Where else are they going to go? I can't see either one of them going up to 61, leaving an Olympic weight and moving up. They're roughly the same age. So I think we're in for about a decade of Lee Fix battles, and hopefully they start in 2019.
Our guest today, Pat Popolizo, head wrestling coach at North Carolina State University. They got a trophy, Andy, at the Ncaa Championships, got 4th, and they have a good team this year, and they have a loaded team next year, but we're going to talk a lot about what they've done at the international level. Had a great World Team Trials, going to have a couple guys in the finals of Final X. Pat, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Great to have you on. Before we get into anything that's current, Andy and I have to delve into the past because our absolute favorite dual meet of all time included you. It was February 14th, 1998, Oklahoma State versus Iowa. Break it down on what you remember about that classic 22-18 win for Oklahoma State. You were a Cowboy at the time. You guys beat Iowa.
Yeah.
Break it down. That was Carver Hawk Arena. If I remember right, your brother Frank was there, and he said that's what inspired him to try to get big crowds and have the journeyman duels and all that he did. So take it from there.
Yeah, that dual meet inspired a lot of things. And that's why I think, more motivation than ever when we had a chance to go back in there to kind of redeem myself as this time as a coach, not as an athlete, because I've never had a personally positive experiences going in there. And that's usually most people probably are like that. But that dual meet was pretty crazy. And it's one of those to talk about with old teammates all the time. That environment that you get to go in, those are lifetime memories there, and there's such passion for wrestling, and it's going to be pretty heated and intense, not just the wrestling, but the fans in general, and that's what makes a really neat dual meet. And we were fortunate enough, I think, to come out on top that day, but I did not have too good of an experience there. I always got to wrestle some of their better guys, and definitely didn't make for a name there in Iowa up until hopefully recently we kind of redeemed myself a little bit.
Well, at the World Team Trials in Rochester, I pointed out Chuck Yeagler, who was the official for that dual meet, and I said, "You remember this guy?" And you said, "Hey, I remember him. He's why I'm here. He keeps motivating me." Is that a little hyperbole, or is that match motivate you to what you're doing today?
No, definitely. It's one of those where it's like, you have, everybody's got those matches where you really get humbled and you have a bad experience and you're like, all right, this is one that I got to figure things out, reevaluate what's going on and make some hard decisions. And it's one of those, you look back and you're like, you're not proud of that. But I think those low moments define you as athletes, and how you respond is, it's the same message you give to our guys. They're going to have some bad matches and you're going to get embarrassed, and how you respond, I think, defines you more than anything. And, you got to dig deep at sometimes and not focus on the lows. But yeah, you brought that up, and I was like trying for the longest time to forget that and let that go. And I still have these night terrors of that. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to brush this one off. But deep down inside, I was like, things were brewing there. I was like, I got to walk away right now.
Do you think Chuck was right in disqualifying you?
No, never.
He
never
wasn't?
Agree with the refs.
Okay. Well, because John Smith was on his case.
I don't know. I think it's pretty hard in that dual meet, looking back, it was like one of those where they had to get a pin or a disqualification. And I don't know, it wasn't like it was a ton of takedowns away. I mean, it was early in the match. It was semi-competitive. I obviously was at a disadvantage being younger and probably undersized at the time and wrestling a guy that was better than me at that time. And I don't know, things happen, and it's one of those. You got to, like I said, reevaluate, and there's got to be some truth to it. But then again, those crowds over there are pretty influential on some calls, I think, at times.
Well, we had what they're calling the match of the century with Ohio State and Penn State this year. Compare and contrast that. I'm sure you had a chance to watch that dual meet. How do you think it compares to that duel from 1998, 20 years before?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. That was, those guys put it on the line, that Penn State, Ohio State, and that's, our sport needs that, seeing guys compete. And, you see guys step up to the plate and get some huge wins. And, that's when upsets happen, and those big rivalries or crazy things happen. Not even upsets, but crazy things happen in those dual meets just because emotions are running. And, I think if you look back, just the setting on across the board of how many good athletes on both sides were competing, a very similar setting. And Penn State and Ohio State this year had rock star teams and athletes across the board and coaches. So I think it was comparable in that aspect. I think social media and where we're at nowadays, the build up for that Penn State, Ohio State probably was, more sought after just because of where we're at in 2018 compared to back in the day when we didn't have all that. It was probably more of people word of mouth and just showing up watching that.
You're a tall guy, long and lean. When I look at you, I don't necessarily see a wrestler. Was that always going to be a good fit for you when you were growing up?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, a lot of times maybe I didn't have the best build to be a wrestler. It's more a little different, unique, being taller. I don't know if it's an advantage or disadvantage. I guess it depends on who you're talking to. So, yeah, I think you as an athlete, you make wherever you go the right fit. And that's something, kids nowadays too. I think no matter what, you pick a school because it's something you believe in, and their philosophy, their technique, whatever it is you see as an athlete when you're being recruited, that attracts you to that school. And once you're there, hopefully the relationship is solid with the coaching staff and the athlete to where everybody's happy. But at the end of the day, you gotta make it the right fit. And, and I think that's what good athletes do, and good coaches adapt and adjust to their athlete to make them better.
Was wrestling your sport right away? Did you dabble in other areas?
I was a little bit of everything growing up. I played football actually all the way through. I probably up until junior and senior year, liked football better, probably because I was maybe having a little more success at it. Was a little bit of a late bloomer, even though I wrestled my whole life growing up. But, grew up with a family that all we did was wrestle. And I think, like I said, I grew pretty fast late, and strength was never on my side until last couple of years in high school, when I finally matured enough to hang in there with some of these guys. But yeah, I don't know. I just, like everybody else was probably into the sport. You like the mental side of wrestling and how much discipline, all the same stuff that people talk about, what makes them who they are today. That's what I respected about wrestling. And that's still the side that I probably love more than anything. It's obviously, I know technique's big, but I love the mental side of the sport and watching guys overcome things. And, sometimes you see guys win off of just pure toughness, mental side of it. And I think that's what makes wrestling unique.
Pat, what do you remember about the recruiting process, and what led you to Oklahoma State? How did you wind up there?
So I actually did not probably have the best recruiting experience coming out of high school. I made some mistakes on my end, and I've learned from it. I actually use it now when I'm recruiting kids, and I don't try to pressure kids into making a decision. I don't think that's a healthy thing to do. And now where we're at, I think kids are fortunate enough to be able to do their homework. But I looked at a couple schools, actually North Carolina State. I did an official visit to North Carolina State. So even, jokingly now, Guzzo's in our room quite a bit. I joke with him all the time. You couldn't get me back then, but our AD now was able to do it. So she's a better recruiter than you.
That's good.
North Carolina State was one of the schools I looked at. Randy Stoudemire at Pittsburgh, I was close travel-wise from home, and I liked what they were doing. I actually made a decision to go, after all my visits were over, I made a decision. I actually signed an NOI at Pittsburgh and slept on it, woke up the next day and was like, I actually want to go to Oklahoma State. And I had to backtrack everything from the NOI, and I had to call the school and tell them and tell Stoudemire that I changed my mind after I signed paperwork and everything. And it, looking back at it now, I didn't know any better. I didn't even know how the recruiting process worked. I didn't know you go through all these things, what an NOI meant and signing it. So I upset, obviously some people when I was doing that. And it was a real quick turnaround. It was like a 48-hour thing where I talked it over. I was like, you know what, this might be a better thing for me to go out there and go to Oklahoma State. And if I can make the team and do A, B, and C, I'll put myself in position to be around the best guys in the country at that time. And I don't know, I made that decision, and I think I upset some people, and I learned a lot from that. And now, nowadays when we're talking to kids, and you see kids switch their minds a lot now. So it's like one of those, they're young and inexperienced at this stuff, and there's a lot thrown at them. So never get upset with a kid in the recruiting process when they change their mind.
We had Tariq Moore on our podcast during the Ncaa championships, told us some crazy stories, said he was not easy to coach. You had a chance to be his teammate. What was Tariq Moore like when you were competing with him for Oklahoma State?
Tariq was awesome. That was probably one of the reasons why I wanted to go. There were guys like him that just had so much passion and intensity. And, when you're young, you're zoned in and you're focused in on one thing, and that's winning the national title. And, that's what I respected for all the guys that were on my team. They all wanted to be national champions. Whether they accomplished that or not, they were all trying to be great. And that's one thing I saw when I was there. I was like, I want to be surrounded by people that think and act and train this way, because it's going to raise my level up. And that mentality is what it takes to be successful. And that's one of the things when I was there, as I was watching him train, and he was young at the time. I think he was maybe a true freshman or just finished his true freshman year, where he was an All-American as a true freshman. And, he's one of the guys in there working out with him and Guerrero, watching those guys train. I was like, wow, these guys are fun to watch in the practice room, and the intensity was so high. So I was like, respected that, and it was one of those places I want to be a part of.
We hear so much about Leroy Smith, Pat Smith, John Smith. You had a chance to be with Mark Smith. He was a 3-time All-American. Fill us in on Mark Smith and what he was like.
Mark and I got along great. He was one of the guys, and I got to Stillwater. Obviously, I was probably stuck out like a sore thumb coming from New York. Everybody thought I had a pretty bad accent. So you line that up with Mark Smith. I grew up a little bit hunting in New York, and Mark was big into fishing and hunting. And, at the time it was wrestling school and you get a little free time. That's what we would do. And Mark was big into coon hunting. He had a ton of dogs, and it was something I'd never heard of or seen before. So I was like, I want to experience this because I probably won't ever encounter this again in my life after Stillwater. And that's the truth. I haven't. And that was some fun stuff, learning, how he trained his dogs, and the whole concept behind that was pretty fun. But no, I got fortunate enough to spend a ton of time with, obviously John, Pat, and Mark, and got to know Leroy just from being around there, and even old Leroy, the whole family together. They've been inspiring people for the sport of wrestling.
You are currently at NC State, but you were at Binghamton before this. That's your home state, New York. Was that hard to leave New York and go to another program throughout the country?
Yeah, no doubt about that. I think things lined up just right for me. At the time, being inexperienced as a coach, having that opportunity to coach a school that, at the time, they weren't really established as a wrestling program at that time. So there was only one way to go, and that was up. And it was 2 hours from home. So I was thinking about this all together. I'm like, well, if we can go there and get a national qualifier, that would be big. And I'm like, I know enough people in the state that maybe they would be willing to send guys at state qualifiers. That was like how I was thinking year one. And little by little, we kept climbing that, raising that bar to, all right, now we need to get 2 national qualifiers, and now we need to get a state champ on our roster. And, we went by the double effect, and then it was like, all right, now we need to get 4 national qualifiers and 3 state champs next year. And things started to roll. And yeah, it was just a little bit of momentum and being in a perfect storm coming together over there.
Pat, it's one thing to take over a brand name and keep it rolling. It's another thing to build a program. What characteristics does it take to be a great builder of a program?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, actually. It's probably one of the harder things to do at first, is to set that culture, because it can really be stressful on the athlete and the coach, because it's implementing your expectations is, one of those things you got to spend as much time as what you're looking for as a coach and what you want out of your guys. And you have to educate them. It's not something they can just show up and do. So there's a lot of time, as much time as we're spending on technique, not so much now where I'm at, but in those early stages of being both at Binghamton and here at NC State, we focused a lot about the culture, and accountability was probably the biggest thing and probably the hardest thing as a coach, because you do realize, you're dealing with, athletes, young kids at times, but you got to do what's best for the program. And if there's a kid that's being a distraction, sometimes you got to make some hard decisions. And that was one of the things we did early at both places, is made them sooner than later and get guys in that could think and act and want to be great. And, now where we're at, our culture is very positive, and, nothing's ever perfect, but we focus still a lot on that. And we have great kids that understand our culture. So the new guys, like, we're bringing in a big class next year, and I expect our more experienced guys to help create and instill that culture that we've already created, which makes it a little easier on us as coaches. And it kind of gets contagious. And it's been a fun thing to watch grow here, and it's been a huge impact on our successes.
When you build that culture, do you write that down? Do you talk to team captains? How do you make that culture, and how do you get a culture shift to what you want it to be?
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of different ways we could do it. We do a lot of team meetings, individual meetings, and then group meetings. It's constantly, instilling the mindset that we want out of our athletes. And we do a lot of communicating with our guys from a coaching staff, as far as whether it's myself, but all our assistant coaches understand it. All our RTC guys wrestled here, so they understand it. And, a lot of these guys, we'll go week to week and have individual meetings and just keep talking about, if we're seeing something that's not going the right way on what we want attitude-wise, it's something we'll address and attack it. Just like, we're sitting there wrestling, you wrestle on a guy and you got to fine-tune some technique. It's the same thing. Everybody's got their philosophy within the program, and that to me is one of the most important things, is the mindset of our guys and having that attitude and that little chip on their shoulder. And that's something, as coaches, that's our job, to make sure our guys understand it and are ready to, fight in the right environment and do all the right things when we leave the practice room. I'm pretty confident that our guys are going to continue to represent themselves in a positive manner. And that's been huge here at NC State as far as building a fan base and growing our resources. Our guys have been phenomenal at making a lot of connections and being a positive role model in our community.
Do athletes care about the credentials of a coach, what they accomplished athletically?
I think it definitely helps. I think it should, and that's one thing our sport, I think, has struggled with, is there's probably a ton of great coaches that never get the opportunities because they didn't win as athletes. And if you look at other sports that are very successful, a lot of those guys weren't the best athlete, but they've studied so much and they've had to be so good in certain areas to make up for it. And I think we lose out on a lot of great coaches that don't get an opportunity because they weren't, whatever it is they were supposed to accomplish in the sport. Some people view it that you got to be a great wrestler to be a great coach. And I think there's some truth to that, but I also think there's definitely guys out there that, we never give the opportunity to because they haven't proven that they could get it done on the mat. And that's unfortunate, but it's the way it goes. And some people have to go about things in a different way to prove themselves.
You're taking over for Tom Ryan as the president of the National Wrestling Coaches Association. What goes into that role, and what are some of the things that you want to get accomplished during your time in that role?
Yeah, NWCA, I think a lot of times doesn't get the recognition that they need and how much they fight and keep things moving for our sport. Mike Moyer has done an unbelievable job. And a lot of times he's probably in the line of fire because he's got to make some hard decisions, and he takes a lot of those hits, but he works around the clock for college wrestling, whether it's D1, D2, D3, junior college, NAI, whatever, women's wrestling, whatever level it is, even the high school level, he's working on our behalf. And I think people don't realize that. And I didn't either until I got on this board and I started talking to him, and I'm on those monthly calls and those meetings that I have to go to. And it's been an unbelievable experience for me. It's been an eye opener. And it's one of those, I love the sport of wrestling, and I was like, where can I leave my impact? And this is part of it, is to kind of serve the time and put some thoughts into, what I think could make the sport better. Obviously, it's not just my decision, but there's some ideas that I have. I think in the short term, obviously keep growing the sport of wrestling. And I think the enrollment level is something that Mike's been working hard at the high school level. So it keeps growing and keep getting more and more college programs. I think the addition to a lot of these programs has been very positive, and we got to keep as many D1 programs going forward and keep adding to that would be very big for our sport. But yeah, there's some things in the short term. There's a lot of moving components right now. You got your regional training centers, you got the national duels that's kind of slipped away a little bit, that I think is going to be something to hopefully come back at some point if we can come up with a formula that everybody agrees on, which is very challenging to do at the college level. So, and then some recruiting things. I think our sport, one of the things I think is needed in our sport when you talk to other coaches, which I do on our campus, and see what they're doing in their organizations. But we need to come up with some kind of recruiting calendar right now. I don't know if people will be for it or against it, but talking to a lot of other college coaches between basketball and football, we're one of the only sports right now that doesn't do something like that, which to me, the whole purpose behind why guys come to college is to be mentored by the coaches. And I think we're spending more time recruiting than we are developing our guys within our room. And I'm not just talking technique, but I'm talking long-term mentoring stuff that we should be doing that is taken away for recruiting. So I think there's some positive to that, and hopefully that's something we can get done in the short term.
Did your athletic administration make a big deal out of your team trophy getting fourth? That's a huge deal. That's what everyone in college wrestling wants, is to get on the podium, get that trophy. Do you feel like you got love after you got that?
Yes, I feel like our AD, Dr. Debbie Yao, is extremely supportive of not just NC State wrestling, but she's been very helpful to college wrestling. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to come here, is because I wanted to be around an AD that cares and loves wrestling as much as, obviously, the amount of time we put into it. That's going to mean a lot. And she's been willing to jump on committees for us. She's on the Blue Ribbon Task Force. So she's got, she was one of the ones I don't think people realized back in the day when they changed the whole qualifying system from, going last year on the history, you had so many All-Americans, you get this many spots in the ACC. The ACC was getting killed as far as qualifiers go. And then when they switched the whole system up off of the, what they're doing now, qualifying basically a spot 2 weeks out, it's been so much more fair for whatever conference you're in. It's more on the athlete now to do their work. So she was a big part of getting that changed. And at first, I think a lot of people were upset that they changed that. But I think now, I don't know if anybody is not in favor of that as far as it's about as pure as you can get to make sure the right guys keep getting the nationals. So, yeah, we've gotten a ton of recognition being back here, and wrestling's growing more and more on campus. And her support is a huge reason why. Obviously our guys are doing all the right things and working hard. But, when you have an athletic director that's willing to help, and anytime we're doing an event or recruiting, she's happy to help out. And that's been a big part of our successes.
She's a former college basketball coach. Where does her passion for wrestling come from?
Same thing that, when you talk about wrestling, and it's the same thing when you see, anybody that's successful that knows about wrestling. I think she respects the amount of work that goes into it and the mental side of things, because she's a very driven individual. She's very motivating, and it's one of those, I think she sees when guys work hard, they are going to succeed. And I think she respects that side of the sport, and she's competitive. So I think it's one of those too as well. No matter what sport you're here at NC State, if you're having success, she's going to want to help you to win a national title. And I'm fortunate and happy that she respects and likes wrestling. She comes to our matches. She was out at the national tournament. She was in Madison Square Garden. She's been to 3 national tournaments since I've been here, and she enjoyed watching the NCAA finals this past year and watching Machiavello bring home a national championship.
Let's talk about him. That was a great story. Here's a guy who you kind of lightly recruited. You just wanted him for depth, and then he comes through the ranks. I think he had a losing record his freshman year, and then he just keeps getting better and better. How did he evolve to this point where now he's on top of the podium and he's an NCAA champion?
Yeah, that's I've learned a lot myself as a coach, coaching a guy like that, because it was one of those where he started wrestling 9th grade in high school, and I think he finally qualifies for states his junior year here in North Carolina. And then he wins a state title his senior year. And similar stuff happens here at the college level. He comes in, he has a losing record, then a 500 record. Then he goes round of 12 and then wins a national title. But the kid has been so driven. And if you ever talk to him, his belief in himself is so high, and it's not anything he's not cocky, but he's very confident in his ability to be successful, and not one where he just wakes up and, hey, today I'm going to be the best guy in the country. It's like, I got 4 years to be the best guy in the country. Well, even when he was in the round of 12, he was like, I'm going to win a national title this year. Like when we were at nationals, and it was like, all right, well, let's win this match first and we'll get to the next one. He's like, no, I'm going to win it. And he was devastated after that tournament. He was truly devastated, and he took the whole year, and he was like, I'm winning. And every day he'd say, I'm going to win a national title this year. And finally it was like one of those, I'm like, I actually believe him. I believe he's going to do it. He believes he's going to do it. And the luxury of our sport, the only person that needed to believe was him. And that's what makes wrestling great. And that's what it's inspiring to see. And I think more than anything, our guys on our team have taken notice of that. And there's a lot of guys right now that believe they can be successful because of what he's done and how he's done it.
Tell us about his nickname, Mac the Mayor.
Yeah. Mock the Mayor.
Mock the Mayor. Okay.
It's all good. Mock the Mayor is what we call him, because there's not a place you'll go. I don't care where we're wrestling. If we were in Oklahoma, you can bring us anywhere, and he will know somebody, or he will leave there knowing somebody, and you'll see. We'll be in an airport walking, and he'll be talking to some guy, and I'm like, "Who's that guy?" He's like, we met, just 5 minutes ago, and I'm like, I thought you really knew that guy, and it's like on campus, we can't walk anywhere with him without him hugging and dabbing somebody up or high-fiving. It's like, if we're in an arena and we're in a rush, it's like Mock's going to be the last guy to the van because he's talking to somebody, and it's just his personality. And I think he was talking to half the kids he was wrestling at the national tournament. Like, I'm like, Mock, what are you doing? You're getting ready to wrestle a kid, next round. He's like, yeah, I was just talking a little bit. And it's, it's just who he is.
How do we keep him engaged in the sport? Where is he going to fit in? We need this guy.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what the luxury with him is he's going to be successful no matter what he does. I'm just thankful he's here training right now. And he's a great mentor to our guys. So it's been, he'll be here. He'll actually be wrestling in Akron at the UW23. So it'll be his first time back. He's wrestled some freestyle, but this will be the first time back since nationals.
All right, you got to break down Tariq Wilson's Ncaa championship run. So we just have to explain what happened here. He came in unseeded, had 9 losses on the season, and then he wins by decision. Then he reverses a decision. I think he got tech fall by Cade Brock in the dual meet over in Italy.
Yep.
And then he gets a 13-5 major decision. Has Gross, the eventual Ncaa champion, on the ropes. They go into overtime, ends up getting pinned, but then comes back and gets major decisions to get third. Where did that come from?
Yeah, it's one of those. We've always talked at some point in the season, someone's going to have their breakout match. And we were waiting all year for that to happen. I think, he had a win over Mueller in the dual meet, and we were like, all right, that was it. This is his breakout match to make him to that next level as an athlete with confidence. And it was kind of hit or miss from there, but watching him wrestle, we knew his ability and athleticism, his mat awareness, and just how slick he is, that he could be very dangerous for anybody to wrestle. And then, we go to the dual meet in Italy, and it was like, we weren't expecting that. Obviously, we knew we were going to be in a tough match, and we thought it'd be a little more back and forth, and it wasn't. And it was like, all right, we're not far off, but this was not a tech fall, wasn't what we were thinking. So we went back, worked on a couple things, had a couple good matches, and then same thing happens. We got to the ACC tournament, and he finished 4th, and I think he got pinned in the 3rd and 4th place match. He just had a bad match there too, and it was like, all right, this is not the right time to be feeling down and out. So a little beat up. We gave him about a week off, and we were like, hey, you're going in your home state. This is no better time to show up and let things fly and shine and be who you are. And he was cool as can be going into that tournament, very relaxed. And he was like, hey, I am going to let things fly and open up. And he sure did. And he put on a show, and he just got confident right in that tournament. You could see it, and just the way he looked, he got confident. And ever since that tournament, he's looked like a totally different person, training and competing.
Bryce Meredith was at NC State for a while, then transferred to Wyoming. And then you had all these matches with your guy, Kevin Jack, and Bryce Meredith. Was that strange throughout that? How did you feel about that transpiring the way it did?
Yeah, that was very tough to deal with. Bryce is a great kid, great family, and he was a great wrestler too. And it was just probably not the right time and situation for him here, and having Kevin, we had him down at 33. I think being away from home, there was a lot of things that played into it. But the worst part about it is Kevin and Bryce were really good friends, and everybody in our team and everybody in the, around here liked Bryce a lot. He's a very likable person. So it was like he leaves, and then those guys, had to wrestle each other a couple times, and it was a killer because we knew how good he was, and we knew those guys went back and forth all the time, practice room and matches, and Bryce had a phenomenal career, and I was happy to see him, be successful. It was torture anytime those two had to wrestle each other, because they're friends and they still talk to this day. And their parents are too. So it was one of those. It was just a weird situation. And I'm very glad that we don't have to encounter that anymore.
And then we'll talk about Hayden Hidley. Man, this is a guy that gets to the finals as a freshman, number 1 seed, only had 1 loss, and that was in the Ncaa championship finals. Clearly you saw something in him when you recruited him, but did you see it going that far and being successful that early?
Yeah, I think he was one of those kids. He had success his whole career, but he finally hit the next level his senior year. So he was a little bit, as far as being the best guy in the country, he might have made that jump his senior year. And then he came here, and we were fortunate enough to redshirt him, which was well needed, because we worked on a lot of things. His training, he trains very hard, and he's very physical and does all the right things. So that's why he's in the position he's in. But we were able to work on the mental side of things a little bit. And I think he grew a lot as a person and an athlete, and going through that red shirt grind for him, I think helped him tremendously. No one knows this, but we brought him with us to one of the matches this last year when he was red shirt. And we were like, all right, why don't you just weigh in, get a feel for where it's like. And, we'll just so you know what it's like to weigh in 1 hour and sit on the bench. And he actually missed weight. And he was like, we were just talking about it just the other day, because he's wrestling down below 157 right now, and it's easy for him to make weight. And he was like, it's just the red shirt circuit was so tough mentally on me, because, you're not in the limelight. You're going to tournaments that are, 6, 7, 8 hours away. You're wrestling in a gym. No one's watching really. So it was one of those. It was hard on him, but at the same time, I think it defines, his success this past year, because he worked so hard at making sure everything was right. And he's one of those that's perfectionist. And, he's still disappointed right now that he didn't win the NCAAs and he didn't win the US Open and, the World Team Trials too. I think he put out a tweet the other day about it. And that's the kind of kid he is. If he's not winning it, it's a disappointment for him. So I think that's what makes him great and keeps him motivated.
Nick Reenan is wrestling David Taylor in the finals of Final X. Now you can't tell me you saw that coming.
I saw something out of Nick Reenan recently that we've been waiting for a long time. And I think it clicked for him at the US Open. I was watching some of those matches that he had against those guys, and it was matches where you're like, wow, he just did that. And when he came back from the US Open, and I think what sparked that is these guys that are here now, and this class that came in is very competitive. And they're like, all right, if you're going to do A, B, and C, I'm going to step up my game, and you're not going to outdo me. And that's what's making this team great right now, is these guys are all competitive like that. They want to see everybody win, but at the same time, they don't want to get left behind. And Reenan stepped up his game like no other this past, couple months in our training, and he's looked very good. But yeah, to go in there and win that tournament, I'm not going to sit here and say it's totally surprised by it, but there's definitely Reenan, when we recruited him, we were thinking he could be the guy pretty quick. And not just at the NCAA level, but, internationally, that's where he's good too. So it's coming a little sooner than later, which is a good thing. And this is a great experience for him. Guys aren't able to train freestyle full time, but he was in our RTC room this past year. So he had a little more of an advantage with freestyle. So he was doing some of the college workouts and coming in with these RTC guys. So he's been training quite a bit of freestyle, so he'll be ready.
I asked him on Sunday about the opportunity to face Taylor in State College, and his response was something along the lines of, my main focus is NCAA championships next year. What were you hoping he would get out of this process this spring? What were goals that you wanted to see him check off?
Winning against guys that have won at the NCAA level, and he's done that. Because right now, that was the goal. When we were sitting here, when we were redshirt, and everything we talked about was to put you in position to compete to win a national title. and this was one of the things we were like, all right, we're going to go to the U.S. Open and we're going to let things roll and fly. And yes, you want our guys to win it. And then when it becomes realistic, and that's, I think why he talked about it is because we've been talking to him as a staff that he wants to win a national title, and he knows it's part of the process to get to that next level at the international level. And not many guys, and I know there's more happening now that are wanting to do both while they're in college. But I think it's kind of new territory for a lot of these guys. And he's one of those guys now that he has to look at it like that he can do both. And I think he's proved to himself that he is, obviously right now, no matter what, he's the number 2 guy, at least for a year. And that's going to be some very valuable experience. And that's the thing. You go from competing to the best guys at the senior level. Now you drop down to college, and college is just as competitive with those top guys. But it gives him some advantages being able to train and wrestle those elite level guys and sharpen up. And that's ultimately what we wanted, was him to make that next jump mentally, technically, and physically. And I think we can check all 3 of those off.
Nick Gwizdowski got a medal last year at the World Championships, part of that World Championship team. I think he splits time between your RTC and going up to State College with the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. How does that work, balancing time between both facilities?
Yeah, so Nick everybody thinks he splits time, but he's here a majority of the times, and then he goes up there and he'll get some good training in with their RTC, and he feels very comfortable with those guys, and those guys have done a tremendous job working with him and helping him. But I would say 50% of the times he's here in Raleigh, and then he's in whatever training camp or competing, probably more, maybe a little bit more here. And then he'll be here for a month and he'll go up there for a week whenever he feels the need to get outside our room. And a lot of people look at maybe me and myself and think that's, why would you do that? It's whatever it is people want to view it as. At the end of the day, I want our senior level guys to be confident and believe in everything they're doing. And if it's going to help them and make them better, we're going to do it. And I think more and more people are willing to do that. And it's helped him tremendously because it's, we have guys stop by all the time in our room, and I'm open to it. And I'm glad that, Penn State with Casey and Kale and their staff, Cody, they're allowing him to go up there because I think they help him a lot, but they also, Nick brings some stuff to the table too in their training. And it's heavyweight, which a lot of times gets challenging to find quality guys day to day. There's not a lot of guys that you can find that are big enough to be in there every day in battle. And we've got a pretty good situation now with Casper, who's coaching over at Duke, but comes over here and trains a little bit. That's helped us a lot recently. And it's just been good. These RTCs, they're new territory. They're unique. But I think the more we open our doors for everybody, it's going to make USA Wrestling what it is. And I think that's why you're seeing more and more success for people right now. And you're seeing young guys really good. It's because they're all able to train with each other.
Pat, you guys obviously have a great thing going there at North Carolina State. North Carolina is on the rise. You mentioned Jacob Casper and Duke. How much of the college success is spreading to the high school level in North Carolina? How much are high school wrestlers picking up on what you guys are doing at the college level? And are you seeing any growth at the lower levels in that state?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Their growth for North Carolina has been very good. It's obviously what Coleman's been doing, and Glenn, those guys have been working extremely hard, and it's showing. Their results are getting better and better, which is going to make us all better. But yeah, it's helped tremendously because I know for NC State back in the day, kids would graduate, and I don't know how much involvement they would have in wrestling. I can't speak on, those kids that graduated before I got here. I don't know too many of them in this area that are coaching or helping out, but I do know the guys that have wrestled and recently graduated are still tied to wrestling, and their roots are here in North Carolina, and they're starting to give back. And that's helped a ton. Whether they're clubs they're doing, their high school coaches, clinics, whatever it is, I know that's happening with us, and I'm confident that those other teams are doing that too, and that's going to multiply in the state. And I think that's what's going to breed more and more success. It's going to take a little bit of time, but there's a lot of great role models for these kids. Machiavello being one of them. He's been second behind Tab Thacker, national champ ever out of the state. So a lot of kids here in state, recognize that, and he's going to be a hot commodity in the state of North Carolina. He's been getting a lot of miles in around the state, going and speaking and stuff. So it's been good, and it's motivating to see kids care and want to follow his footsteps. What makes you unique from any other wrestling coach in America? Ooh, that's a tough question. I don't know. To me, I think one thing that I'm okay with and willing is to open our doors at any time. And like we just talked about, I don't care if I have to send my guy somewhere. If there's something he can get that's going to benefit him as an athlete, then I'm all for it. I don't know. I can't speak on what other people do, but I'm pretty open and try to be creative on things that we're doing, whether it's training or competition or recruiting, whatever it is we're trying to do. Try to do it in a different way because, if we keep all trying to do the same things, I think you get the same results. So that's something we worked hard on this year, is changing up our training, changing up everything that we were doing to make sure we maximize our talent and come as close to that as you can. At least there's no perfect formula to it. So I don't know. I try to, it's one of those, sometimes you got to sit down and critique yourself, and, wherever you're weak, I think what makes me unique is I'm willing to surround myself with people that can do better at a job than I can, and let me focus on the things that I think I'm good at, or at least will work hard at. And I've been fortunate enough to be around some very, very great coaches, and whether they're on to bigger and better things now or coaches that are here with us right now, we have a great staff. All the people that are here intact right now are phenomenal and work extremely hard, and we all work well together. So it's helped a lot. You're talking about some leadership characteristics there. Who are people you look up to in terms of leaders, maybe not just inside the sport of wrestling, but outside as well? Yeah, I think it's important. You got to have mentors. And I have them in wrestling. Obviously, John's played a major role with anytime you need some good advice, calling a guy like him. And I'm thankful that we have that relationship. Mark Cody was a big help to me. He was the guy that took me under his wing when it came to coaching, because there was a point where probably was close to getting out of coaching. It was a struggle. I mean, I think any assistant can talk about that, but it's a struggle until you get to that certain level. It can be challenging. And there was a time where I was like, all right, I don't know if this is what I want to do. But Mark Cody's been very good. And then, obviously I try to focus a lot right now on the business side of things. I think that's where we're at as a sport. It's now, if we're going to have RTCs and there's so many hats you got to wear as a D1 coach, really miss being an actual coach that shows technique in the room day to day, because that's where it started, but it's transforming into something totally different because there's so many things going on right now, and to keep up with everything is hard. So that's what great assistants are doing. Here we have them in our RTC, but some businessmen locally. One of them that's been, a huge factor in our success. That's Mark Ross, who owns the Oak Grove Technology. He's the CEO of that company, and they've been doing very well, but picking his brain on a lot of the logistics and what it takes to be successful, and putting certain things in place on a business plan. That's really been a lot of my focus lately over the last couple of years, is the business side of wrestling and running the program and making sure everything's buttoned up pretty tight between finances and liability, all the things that come along with any kind of company, I guess, you're running. And that's something I've learned. They don't teach you that stuff when you're in college, and unless you're going, I don't know, maybe some business majors. I've learned some of the stuff, but the hats we got to wear right now, they have not been taught along the way, and you learn them the hard way. Pat, I want to thank you for coming on the program. I
fully expect to see you and Andy Hamilton at Yankee Stadium in the judges' chambers rooting on the Yankees, and we'll see how this transpires. I know Doug Schwab's a big Red Sox fan, so that's going to be a storyline we'll follow to see how this plays out.
We'll have to throw it back in his face for sure. If he's going to be a Red Sox fan.
Get Scott Goodale.
Yeah, Scott Goodale. Yeah, we have a good crew of Yankees fans, so we'll keep following that. But thank you for the time. All the best. You have a great RTC there. You got some guys you're going to be cheering on at Final X, but all the best as you move forward with your program.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
That was Pat Popolizo for Andy Hamilton. I'm Kyle Klingman. You've been listening to On the Mat.
This show is part of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MatTalkOnline.com.